Greetings, brothers and sisters. So this is a nightmare. I uploaded this video yesterday, and then I got comments saying that I put the same voiceover in twice, which somehow I did. I don't know. It's probably the bigger surprise is I don't do that more often. And so YouTube has an editing feature, which they've constantly changed. And I use the editing feature, and somehow instead of editing out the piece, the 11-minute piece I wanted to edit out, they edited out everything else, which is a disaster. So now that video's up, it should be 1 minute 40, something minutes long, and now it's 11 minutes long, and it just has the one extra voiceover. So here is the entire video minus the extra voiceover. If you already watched it, you don't have to watch it again, obviously. But I'm just re-uploading it because I don't know what YouTube's doing, but it's a disaster. Okay, greetings, brothers and sisters. My wife requested me the other day to talk about this. I talked about it later in one video. But she suggested this because I don't think people all know about the voting process in the primaries. I already did. I'm in the editing process of this video, but I just remembered that I wanted to do this. And so I talked about this, like I said, in a couple of videos on the Kennedy thing already. And the idea here is lots of Republicans can vote in various primaries. You can either vote as a Republican for the Republican primary, you could vote for the Democratic primary. And for people who are Republicans or truthers, even if you don't vote for Kennedy, let's say you're a Trumper and you want to vote for Trump in the general election, you can vote for Kennedy in the primary, as Trump is kind of a shoo-in, unless something happens with him, and then who knows what, whatever. That's neither here nor there. But you can vote, either register as a Democrat or an independent in some states and vote for the Democratic primary and vote for Kennedy. This has been done quite often before. In fact, Democrats have encouraged Democrats to do this, right? If, like, say, the Republican primary was really tight and the Democratic Party was already, the primary candidate was already established, Democrats would encourage their voting bloc to vote for the candidate that was behind in many cases, and therefore create a sort of divided convention, a contested election, one that wasn't, the person didn't win outright. And they would go into the convention having to decide who was going to be the candidate, right? Which is, not a good way to start off their run for the general election. So many states have what's called an open primary. Now, some of the states I'm talking about in this video, I talk a lot about New Hampshire, which has a modified primary, and then South Carolina, which is going to be one of the early states, has a open primary, right? Which, if it's my understanding, that means even if you're registered as a Republican in South Carolina, you can still vote in the Democratic primary. And so that is something, again, I don't tell people what to do, and I don't tell people what to believe. I mean, I give ideas and, sometimes suggestions or whatever, at most suggestions. This is kind of a combination between an idea and a suggestion. And I'm going to tell you why, and I'm going to talk about it later in this video, but I want to talk about it here and then more details later in the video. And, if you're Joe Biden, if you really dislike Joe Biden, and I know lots of you guys do, then the best way to deal with him is to undercut him now. Because if Kennedy comes close to winning or wins and they have to steal it from him, then that's going to weaken Joe Biden's, his support. The Bernie Sanders people are hanging by a thread after getting cheated twice by the Democratic National Committee. And the Sanders people are going to mostly vote for RFK. And if they steal it from him and all these claims that they've made about being election deniers, if they steal another election if they steal a primary. You know, they rigged the primary against Bernie, which was discussed, which was written by Donna Brazil, who came in for Debbie Wasserman Schultz. I've read that many a times. She talked to Bernie Sanders and basically apologized to him. But she said when she came in and looked at what had happened, they had rigged the primary so Hillary would win. Otherwise, Bernie would have won. And they openly rigged it last time, where they just said, no way Bernie Sanders is going to win. And they came out and they manipulated the election. I've described that so many times. And so if you don't know about that, then, you can read about it or whatever. But it happened twice. And so if they do it again here with Kennedy, it just more undermines their claims of being people who respect elections, right? They've said Trump and Trumpers don't respect elections. So make them cheat again, right? Make them rob Kennedy. Even if you don't want Kennedy to win, it's a great part of the show. It's just, even if you just want entertainment, it's great. Like, you can participate in this in a way that's just, it's just for the show. It's a show of it itself. So what you have to do is look up your state. I'm looking for a map. I'm looking at a map right now. North Carolina, West Virginia, Ohio, New Jersey, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire all have modified primaries. The closed primaries, that means that if you're a Democrat, you have to vote for a Democrat. If you're a Republican, you have to vote for a Republican. You would have to register as a Democrat, but in the general elections, you could still vote for a Republican. And that's Kentucky, Pennsylvania, I believe Delaware, and D.C., New York, Maine, Iowa, Kansas, Wyoming, New Mexico. There's not that many states that are closed, right? And not many of the early voting states. Most states are open, and some are modified. I don't know what exactly modified means. So this is what it says there. States with open or partially open primaries allow unaffiliated voters, in some cases people registered to different parties, to vote in the state's Democratic presidential primary. So you can look up which state does what and when you have to register to do this. Personally, I want to see it. I want to see JoJo Magoo get humiliated. I want the Democrats to have to cheat. I want the people to panic. I want them to be pissed off because Republicans are voting in their primaries. I want to see the unified support that Kennedy gets, right? I want all these things. All of these things are incredible entertainment. It's all truther stuff. It's validating to all of us here. And, I'd like to see Kennedy, get to speak about these things in the national debate. And if JoJo loses to Kennedy, then, everything will be better. I don't believe in the electoral process. I don't vote. I don't think things can be changed. I don't think the country can be saved. But I think this is, worthwhile. Something I'm already kind of getting, it's when Trump won and how great it was when the Democrats like Rachel Maddow were crying on election night. It's kind of like that stuff. So this is the potential. I don't want to get too excited about it, but it could be really exciting. So if you're interested in doing that, or if you just want to vote for Kennedy anyway, you can find out about your state, and talk to people about it. People who don't really want to vote, and just explain the advantages to it. People who aren't interested in politics even, just that, how cool it would be to see JoJo Magoo be in a contested primary or even lose a primary and have them have to rig the election, all these things. They know it's coming, and I'm going to get into it in this video. They're really scared about this. They're already trying to rig the election before it's even started. Of Kennedy in New Hampshire. And I just want to add one other thing here, because you can hear it in his speech. And then there's a hit piece that guy does. The guy just completely punks himself. It's hilarious. The guy in MSNBC, he completely owns himself. And it's great. I'm probably going to make a short video or maybe a meme of it. But either way, it's wonderful. So that's all coming up. And the one thing I want to say, someone, I think the guy's name is Friedman. I'm not sure who the guy is. But I saw this guy interviewed Ye, when Ye was going through his controversial thing or whatever. But somebody recommended this interview with Kennedy, and my wife and I listened to it. You know, and I've heard him talk about these various philosophers and some of the questions that are asked. Sometimes he brings it up himself. Sometimes you know, he's asked these questions. But Kennedy is a highly educated person. You know, and I'm not into that personally. Like I don't value it like other people do. You know, I have my own, limited education, my own critical thinking style, and my own connecting to the divine, all these things that I do personally here. But it's nice to see it because we haven't had, everything's so dumbed down. And clearly from Kennedy's description of his youth and his family, there's certain families that, especially if they have money and the kids go to private schools, but not just in school, like they debate things around the dinner table, right? They have to, perform in some way, train their intellectual and hone their intellectual skills. They have to be very well read. They have to read a variety. They have to be, it's just the way that they used to prepare really rich people, where they're supposed to be, fairly well versed in a variety of topics and have vast vocabularies. And these families who encourage it, right? They encourage debate, and they challenge their kids to have strong opinions about things, or at least have, a grasp of these various philosophies and things. And for me, like a lot of it, I don't believe in. A lot of it, I think, is based in ego. It goes against some of my spiritual beliefs. But it's interesting. Kennedy's grasp of history, the education he's had, and the challenge it was probably growing up in that family where, you had a president, a potential president, and, a long history of this family in politics, an uncle who was a senator, and then all these other things, right? And, the challenges that involved. If you ever seen that movie, Captain Fantastic, and it's a weird movie for me because it had so much in common with my family, like weird stuff. Like, some of the names of the people involved, and, what it is there's a couple, the guy who plays Aragorn in the Lord of the Rings movies, brings his kids out, and he's married at the time, out into like the Washington wilderness, and they get like an excellent education as well as training in survival skills and elite athletic type of, mountain climbing and things like that, right? They're pushed to the limit. And the mother commits suicide. And, this is the kind of family I'm talking about, where people are pressed to be intellectual, be well-versed, well-thought, learn how to debate, learn how to argue positions. And this is what Kennedy grew up in. So he's trained for this, the political world in different ways than other people are. Like, some of these people they're talking about, he's talking about philosophers and books he's read. And I know Trump hasn't read these books. I know if Biden hasn't read these books. They just, all these other candidates appeal to the dumbed down sheeple for the most part. Trump appeals to the dumbed down, right-wing truthers a little bit. But for the most part, it's like just the politics of stupidity. And you can really see it in this video and like the interviews I've listened to. He just has, a higher level of, intellect. And these people who are from academia, people who grow up in the academic world and where their friends are always, people are trying to always prove they're the smartest person in the room. And, I don't really dig those people because, I'm smart my own way, but I'm lazy about it. Like I'm not, and I have my own way of, discernment, which I think is better because it involves a level of ignorance and a level of spiritual, a spiritual connectivity. But, as far as Kennedy goes in politics, it's a good quality to have. I'm not a politician and I'm not a debater and these things. I'm not any of these things, right? So, for what I do here, what I do is great for me. But for someone who's in the political field, Kennedy is a breath of fresh air because he knows stuff. Like he has he says having a curious mind and these things. And he does have that. And he has he talks about critical thinking all the time. Anyway, here's the other introduction I did earlier. Okay, greetings, brothers and sisters. I just have a little sort of health update to talk about. I've had some experience. I kind of haven't talked about this since I've, had that one sort of health crisis. And, I maybe mentioned that I started doing stretches, rhomboid stretches, things for my, upper back. There seems to be some kind of pulled muscle that's affecting a nerve in my neck, which is causing chest pains as well, like things like this. But my health has gotten better. I'm working outside. I've been doing a lot of work outside. And, I feel physically strong. But once in a while I have this sort of glitch out thing. I don't think there's any problem with my heart. I feel like I kind of know there's not. And I think that, because COVID and the you-know-what are, I think they mess with people's nervous system and makes your system glitch out, which is causing cardiac arrest. Like it messes with your electromagnetic signals. That might have something to do with 5G. So all that. And, yesterday was my birthday, and please you don't need to say anything. Like this isn't about wishing me a belated birthday or something. I'm just saying this, because, it's a different kind of day. I've talked about it in my Journey series a little bit. That's coming out. 111 will be out next week or whatever. But again, this isn't about anything to do with you acknowledging my birthday, because I'm fine with that not happening. It's probably better, in terms of just less comments about it. But my wife gave me a basketball hoop, and we had it, and we had it here for a couple of days before. It showed up early, and we put it together yesterday morning, and I hadn't shot a basketball in 5 years. And 3 years, I don't even know. And I still do the basketball movements. Basketball was so significant to me. Even now I would once in a while imaginary dribble, or have almost I'm walking down the hall and I have a basketball moment. It's just something that's ingrained, and I can still visualize myself playing, like I used to. It happens very infrequently, but it's there a little bit, right? And so I was interested in it. It was hot. It was 92 degrees, and I was interested in it in a couple of ways. That how my physical condition, my heart rate and things, because in terms of exercise, my wife and I walk and I do physical farm work, but I don't get my my heart rate up that high. I don't run or anything like this. And my wife was saying that she was reading that is in some ways it was better to exercise and get your heart going, even do short sprints. But at this point in my life, it kind of physically hurts to run fast, and I can only run so fast. I've been losing weight. I stopped eating at night, for a variety of reasons, but it's something that I've had to eat before bed. When I got tested for my metabolism, after I had COVID, it came out that I had the highest metabolism, the fastest, which made sense for my family. But I when I waited tables and I worked in treatment centers, these jobs I did for my early adulthood, I would come home at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and I'd be hungry, and I couldn't sleep if I didn't eat. So I'd eat basically a dinner at late at night, because of the jobs I kept and the hours I was having. So this developed into a habit. And there were a few times I worked to not eating at night. When I got to be about 38 or 40, I put on weight. I'd always been skinny. I've always been naturally thin. I started putting on weight, and I stopped eating at night, and it was good, but I was having trouble sleeping. I wouldn't sleep through the night. And, I just, sometimes I wouldn't have energy the next day or whatever. I fasted a few different times, and because of eating at night, my liver wouldn't detox, right? It wouldn't, because of this, my habits, my routine. And so not eating, I'm taking this, a little bit of olive oil and lemon juice and cayenne pepper. One of my viewers sent it to me. It was a way to get rid of a fatty liver, and I'm doing liver massage and various like acupuncture points to get my blood flow going, and that's helped. Like this, not the energetic flow, not blood flow, but I'm also working on the gallbladder and heart, the liver region with various acupuncture pressure points, right? So acupressure points. And it's really had a miraculous effect. And I'm not hungry at night, so that's been great. Once in a while, I can drink a glass of milk if I have, sometimes I have to, I have pills I have to take at bedtime or something. But for the most part, I haven't been eating at night, but I'm detoxing. So that all played into me playing basketball. And, because I hadn't worked up a sweat like that. And I realized that my heart's fine. Like, once in a while I have a regular heartbeat, but I think that has to do with the messing up of the electromagnetic part of my system. And I think the COVID does that. Certainly COVID, what does that. I think that the heart cardiac arrest people are having is because that's all getting messed up, right? The nervous system and things like this. But I was surprised in a couple of ways, both in a good way and a bad way. Like I could, still move like I used to do on the basketball court. Like I remembered how to do that. And my jump shot, I was able to reclaim my jump shot. I was shooting well. Like I could hear the ball. Like there's a certain sound that you have where the ball, when you flick your wrist and you put backspin on the ball, and the ball just has this sound that leaves your hands, and all that stuff just came back to me. My dribbling was okay. Like it's, I'm just stiffer than I used to. But like I used to be able to like just easily finger roll. I could dunk the ball after I warmed up a little bit. But I could easily just, dribble in and take 2 steps and finger roll, and just, my hand would be, above the rim a little bit. And I just, and that was hard. Like the power, the strength in my, my wrist and my arms, I'm just not using it for that anymore. Like I knew how to do it, and I could only jump like 2 inches off the ground, so there's this thing that happened. And like I'd get winded just when the ball, sometimes the ball like hits the bottom of, you have an air ball or something, the ball misses and it takes a bad bounce and it goes bouncing away. And we had a little bit of an incline, and if it gets to the hill, the ball will just keep on rolling. So I had to run a little bit to get the ball, and I was like, wow, I'm just, I don't have that level of speed, and when I did the finger roll, like my whole body hurt when I landed after jumping like 2 inches off the ground. So there's that. Like, there's still, I was surprised at how much I could still do, just in terms of like, doing shooting, and how it was like a good workout for me, at this level of my physical capacity. But what I've been noticing lately is like later on at night, my body will glitch out a little bit sometimes. It's especially if I overexert myself. That happened briefly, but, it passed. And it was good to be able to, just get my heart pumping and doing all these things. So that was a positive sign. I had that health crisis, which was just weird. But I think that the COVID thing, more than anything else, it just makes your body glitch out. But anyways, to move forward here, my wife and I listened to this speech, and I'm going to show you the speech. And YouTube recommended a video of another hit piece on Kennedy. So the speech is from New Hampshire. And, I just want to say this one thing. Because, as far as I was concerned, voting was a thing of the past. And my belief system and the predictions that are given in the Sizemore system and my knowledge of the system itself is that it's bad. Like our system's bad, but we're dependent on it. I say this over and over again. So it's a combination of being dependent on a bad system and wanting this system to stay, going, at least in terms of, the rest of my life. I mean, on a selfish level, because it's what I'm, used to in terms of my material experience and my lifestyle, whatever. And I know that's not good for me spiritually, and not good for the earth, and not good for everybody else either. It's a conundrum, and that's where the hopium comes in, and people's level of understanding and being able to, live without having to reconcile these two things. Because we really can't. Like, we're participating in the system. We need the system. But we know the system's evil. Like, that's most people can't be like that. Most people can't, understand that or feel that the system collapsing is a good thing. Most people can't, just go there. And, they just shut down, because they don't want to hear that or know that, even here in the truth community. That's where hopium comes in. And I don't have hopium for RFK. I just, I wouldn't have hopium for anybody, but this idea that this guy's a little different, right? But, there's just the right thing to do. And for me, the right thing to do is at least support RFK's candidacy here. Not that he believes everything that we believe or I believe, or that I think he's going to win and change things, or that he even can win. I don't, those things are just the way the story's going to play out. But this guy verbalizes, at least in terms of the truther stuff, his position and his ability to conceptualize things. It's different than Trump. It's different from Trump, who's pandering to a truther audience to get support and votes, but he's not sincere about it, and he doesn't really understand it. And he's not he doesn't reach this because he has he's not like Kennedy's an environmentalist from his own, he likes to do things. He likes to fish, and I guess he does fun hunting with falcons and things like this, right? He's into wildlife and other things, right? My wife she listened to this interview with Jim Brewer, and he talked about, having sort of exotic pets and animals that, some of the things that being a rich person he was able to do, and things with, nature and whatever it is, right? But this guy has sincerity in his approach to being what we consider a truther. I think he's a real truther, just like there are people here who disagree with, I don't agree with their beliefs, or other, makers of content like me. And we differ quite a bit on the way that we're doing this, but we're pursuing the truth because we know that we're being lied to by the system. And he's very, good at that. You can see that he's sincere in this. And so he represents our, what we're going through. Someone who, even on his level of being a Kennedy, is being treated the same way we get treated all the time. And so it's almost I have to support him, in some way, whatever that means, because it's just the right thing to do. I don't believe he could be successful. I don't believe the system could be saved. But, he is representing that opportunity. I don't expect people will wake up and change. I don't think people will gravitate to what he's saying or whatever, but you have to give him a shot, because it's just it's the right thing to do. We complain all the time that there isn't a quality politician, somebody who appeals to, smarter people, more evolved people. People appeal to the dumbed down masses, and it's just all fake. It's a performance. It's posing. It's being a poser. And then someone comes around who's actually legitimate. His speeches are compelling. His stories are interesting. He's somebody that I can listen to, right? And I find it, interesting. Where I just don't see, I haven't had that politically probably my whole life, right? I haven't seen a politician that was compelling. So that's why I'm changing. We all have to be able to be flexible in our, beliefs. I mean, I don't know if I'm voting or not, because my vote would have to matter for me to register and go through all that, just out of laziness and whatever it is. But there's a pathway to success here, which I'll talk about. He has a pathway to victory, or at least humiliation of Joe Biden, Joseph R. Biden, Jojo Magoo. There's a pathway to totally obliterate and humiliate the Democratic Party. So I'm going to start off with the speech here first, and then I'm going to get to the stuff with the hit piece on MSNBC, and then some other stuff if I have time. But it's a compelling switch in the narrative. All right, so let's get to it here. Before we get into RFK Jr., I covered this yesterday. This tall basketball player, Victor Wembanyama, who is featured here, was accosted by one Britney J. Spears, who was fangirling him. And Luckily, the security guard was there to slap her around. And I was lamenting on how, in the age of, this happened in Vegas. He had his first summer league game in Vegas, and he played poorly, but he's impressive in terms of his size and skill. He's a 7'5" guy from France who's, whatever. If you don't know who he is, you don't know who he is. And Britney Spears was in Vegas for whatever reason, and this is supposedly her. And I was lamenting, like, how can we not have video of this? Victor Wembanyama is walking through a hotel, and Britney Spears accosts him, and nobody's videoing it, but somebody did. And so she comes up. You see here, she's going to touch him here. Slapped. You can see that. The security guard right here is going to slap her. Wait, that's not far enough. Okay, you can see the arm coming up here. Go back a little bit. And boom. She gets slapped right across the face because, that's how security guards roll in San Antonio when they're in Vegas. She said she was knocked to the floor. So that's the video evidence. A bunch of people sent me this, so I just want to put it up so everyone knows that I have the video, and we now know that it appears to be Britney Spears getting slapped in the face because she was, bothering a young basketball player. Okay, so here he is in New Hampshire. So here he talks about, in the beginning he talks about, his experience. Well, we might as well listen to it here.
Lake Wine Oak, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to speak to the New Hampshire State Senate. My family has a long history and deep history in this state, going back to my great-grandparents, Honey Fitz, and...
So this is New Hampshire here, right? So this is where I grew up in Connecticut. This is the Kennedys here. I'm not sure where they are. They have places on Cape Cod. They have property over Massachusetts. But this is a very small area, like compared to the rest of the country. New England is, you put all these states together, other than New York, and, Maine's a little bit bigger. It is, just unbelievably small compared to just like some of these Midwestern states, right? And so you can drive from Connecticut to New Hampshire, through Massachusetts, over to Rhode Island, these places, in a few hours, where it takes 4 or 5 hours when you're in the West to go from one place to another. So the Kennedys, they're from the Massachusetts area, and they have links to these other states. I did a report when I was a kid on New Hampshire. I had to pick 2 states, and was assigned 2 states, and I picked New Hampshire and Idaho. And there isn't very big cities here. It's a very rural state. These are places where people go to hike and ski. There's some mountains there. But they're very rural states, very country people. He's going to talk about how many independents there are in the state, right? He's going to talk about the importance of New Hampshire in terms of being the first primary and what it represents to democracy. And that's really interesting because Joe Biden is going to take it away. And we're going to get into that here in just a moment.
And Patrick Kennedy, my grandfather, Joseph Kennedy, spent his summer camps at Lake Wine Oak up in Wolfsboro. I grew up camping and hiking every summer and every winter in New Hampshire, hiking the presidential range. I talked with Speaker Packard and saw his beautiful photographs of some of those peaks. I told him that I'd spent many nights on Mount Washington in the huts in the middle of the winter skiing Tuckerman's Ravine. I hiked in the summer times the presidentials, but also Osceola, Tri-Pyramid, Mount Carrigan, Mount Flume, and many, many others.
See, this is significant. I do these types of things. I'm an outdoors person, being a farmer, and I always have gone on hikes and explorations and things like this. When politicians go and they visit states, they want to create a connection, similar experiences and understanding of the culture there, right? And, Joe Biden going back to Delaware and talking about, a fight he almost had with this imaginary villain named Corn Pop, and how the African-American kids used to rub his legs when he was a lifeguard, like, is weird, right? Like, it's not, once in a while Joe Biden lifts somebody's story and, tells a story that isn't his. Trump himself doesn't have these types of stories because even though the Kennedys are elitist, at least they're part of the elite club family from, the political family, and they're wealthy. He's had a more, natural life than Trump. Trump is like a rich boy who is all about making money. Trump's biggest pursuit was fame and fortune, right? He's not an outdoors person. He plays a little golf, right? But he doesn't have experiences in these states like other people, right? He takes a private jet, helicopter to some place, and, it's a different experience, where Kennedy has these stories and he can relate to the people in New Hampshire. And it's significant here because of what Joe Biden is doing and how this, there's a pathway to victory for Kennedy, at least them having to out and out cheat Kennedy, which I'll get into, the DNC, in a moment.
My brothers cut trails for their summer job at Waterville Valley, and I'm very proud that Tommy Corcoran named the steepest slope at Waterville after my father, who loved to ski there as well. I'm here because I am going to participate in this primary in this state. I oppose the DNC's decision to evict New Hampshire from the First in Nation status, which is so important, I think, to our country. It is more than a tradition. New Hampshire plays a critical role in vetting candidates for the rest of the country.
Okay, so Joe Biden, because he lost New Hampshire last time to either Bernie Sanders or Pete Buttigieg, but he just didn't lose. He came in 4th or 5th, right? And so this is significant. This is the narrative, the way it's taken place. And it's a nightmare for the DNC and for all of it. Because he's going to talk about rigged elections here, Kennedy, in a way that, is much more, all of it, all the way that, he expresses it here is better than what we've heard from other candidates. Certainly Trump, it's all about Trump personally, but he's talking about democracy. And he's talking about tradition and, going back to like the founding fathers and just all the stuff that New Hampshire being one of the original 13 colonies. And, every state has something that is their claim to fame, at least one thing, but multiple things, right? States are known for different things. Some states are good at a certain sport. They're known for, like when I lived in Idaho, they have more rivers than any other state, right? There's some states that have mountains. There's some states like, Arizona has the Grand Canyon, right? These different things. California has all these things, the Redwood Forest, but it also has epic cities in Los Angeles and San Francisco. These various states I've lived in, New Mexico has its own unique, it's the only state that has all of the different climates. Like it has a rainforest, it has, desert, it has all these different things, right? All these different microclimates or whatever they're called. Like every state has their, specific speciality. And for New Hampshire, it's the first state in the primaries. And it's been this way. It's been traditional for a long time. And he's going to get into why that's important here, why it's more than just a badge of honor. It plays a role here.
Other parts of the United States, the states are content with having politicians come in with money that they've gotten from billionaires and carpet bombing the state from 30,000 feet with advertising, or staging occasionally rallies that are heavily orchestrated, where the crowds are heavily screened and they're kind of a kabuki theater of democracy. But here, politicians get real democracy. They encounter people, they have to go to the hair salons, the barber shops, the diners, the gas stations. They have to talk to the 80-year-old lady who reads the Financial Times and The Economist every week and ask them a question and a follow-up question and another follow-up question that they will never get from CNN. They will never get it from the New York Times even. And it's retail politics. And they are vetting our candidates the same way that they would vet a city council candidate or a local mayor. And they do it for the rest of the country. And the other thing that's very important about New Hampshire.
See, this is interesting because it's more than just being the first state. New Hampshire is a thing. It's a thing when you see a movie or TV show, something like The West Wing, or some kind of political TV show or movie. And it's important in any kind of national political process. The candidates start campaigning in New Hampshire early on. It's a small state with no really large city, and they have to go out there and meet the people. And they have to impress the people, right? We'll come back to this in a moment and let them finish up here.
Is that there are 42% of the people in this state are registered independents. It's the highest of any state. And the importance of that right now is that those are people who are critical thinkers, they're independent thinkers, and they're able to step outside of that fixed, paralyzing iceberg of partisanship that has our country at each other's throats. They're able to look at candidates without the ideology blocking their vision and really judge the candidates on what they say and be open to new ideas that are not locked in that ideological razor grip. Right now, it's particularly important at New Hampshire that we have a real democracy and a democratic election in New Hampshire. There's so many Americans who believe that the system now is rigged, the economic system, but also the political system, that the elections are fixed. New Hampshire has the gold standard for political elections. People don't question the results. And we ought to be, the Democratic Party particularly, ought to be making this election a template for democracy to our country and to the rest of the world. And say, we're going to have a real democracy where candidates meet human beings, are questioned by them, have town halls, and deal with all of the difficulties of retail politics. And we need to show the American people that is particularly important at this time.
So this was the results of the primary, the New Hampshire primary. So Sanders beat Buttigieg by two points. Sanders had 26, Buttigieg 24, Klobuchar 20, Warren 9, and Biden had 9%. And Warren had more votes than Biden. So Biden came in fifth. And these are the people he lost to, right? And, he got clobbered. And so, this is a big deal here. Biden has a monster problem, and the election hasn't even started yet. Democrats buy time and fight over New Hampshire primary, Biden's New Hampshire mess. And it says here, that's what makes New Hampshire worth watching now that President Joe Biden has announced that his candidacy for the second term. Biden angered the state's top Democrats by pushing changes to the 2024 nominating calendar that eliminated New Hampshire's prized first-in-the-nation primary status and put South Carolina in the leadoff spot. And we'll get to that, why that's so messed up in a moment. New Hampshire is still likely to go first, thanks to the state's law that requires the primary to take place 1 week before any others. And, states have moved up before, and New Hampshire then moves up their primary. Like they'll just, and they can do it because they have a smaller population, and they have been doing this for years. It's an organized state. They're not going to have what happened in Georgia or Pennsylvania in the last election. They are an organized political state, right? And they're very, into this. And the Democratic National Committee gave New Hampshire until June to change the date, but that's a no-go with the Republican who control the governor's office and the state legislature. And so they're not going to change the date. They're going to go first. And so Biden faces a quandary of his own design. If he participates in the primary of the state that's poised to go rogue, he risks violating party rules, which would likely impose sanctions on the candidates or states in violation. A Biden campaign aide said that the president and his team would abide by the sanction imposed by the DNC if that were to happen. And so, but if Biden doesn't appear on the ballot, he would cede the unofficial first contest to Robert Kennedy Jr. and self-help guru Marianne Williamson. And so he would come in and lose to Marianne Williamson. He would forfeit the first state in the primary. And, I mean, it's an absolute mess. It's being covered here. It's being covered here within Washington Post. Primaries haven't started, and Biden has a problem already. Will Biden get embarrassed in Iowa and New Hampshire? He did last time. So the narrative is already shaping up. They're trying to rig this against Kennedy, and it hasn't even commenced. He's a sitting president and should be a shoo-in. He has a pretty good favorability rating in the Democratic Party, but they're shaking in their boots over Kennedy, right? And, you know, Kennedy's polling at 20% of Democrats. You know, he's more than just Democrats. He has a lot of support from Republicans. I'm seeing more and more of this. People who have been, you know, Republican truthers, Republican people, many of you are liking this guy. And so he has a big support in the truth community, right-wing people, anti-boopers, right, all this stuff. And so he has a good section of national, you know, his national polling numbers are significant. And he's going to do really well with independents because when they see the guy and they hear him talk, he's just going to be more reasonable. And we've had these horrible candidates for years. And he's the first real candidate that I've seen probably in my lifetime that can talk and, you know, in a natural way and be authentic and sincere, right? And so they have a huge problem here because even with polling 20%, that's what Biden polled the entire 2019 before the primaries. And people might like Kennedy, but don't think he can win. But if he wins one primary, and we've seen this before, it's happened. You know, Hillary Clinton was like a shoo-in for the presidential, you know, to be the Democratic nominee against Barack Obama. Obama was, you know, he had his CIA support or whatever it was. He was there. You know, it seemed like he was, you know, basically raised by the CIA, and there's documentation of that. But, you know, everyone thought Hillary was going to win. It was her turn. And Obama came in, he won some early states, and it was over. Because people are like, oh, we like this guy better, and if he can win, we're voting for him. People want to vote for somebody who can win. Like, I'm not going to bother with this thing if Kennedy has no choice. You know, I'll talk about how he's better, and, you know, I'll talk about the censorship. But that's about it, right? If he doesn't have a chance, not choice. If he doesn't have a chance, it's no reason to vote for him. Why bother, right? In terms of, you know, it's a waste of time and energy. And, you know, even if he doesn't have a chance to win because they'll rig it, make them rig it. Because that's great. I mean, that's great for me here. You know, that's a great story. That's great for us in the truth community. Make the Democrats rig it right in front of everybody. They're already trying to rig it because there's a tradition here. And he's going to get more into the importance of New Hampshire. Like, he's just getting started of what New Hampshire represents. But it's a place where candidates go and get vetted. Whereas, you know, he's saying, and I know this to be true, you know, the candidates go to these other big states and they can't campaign as long and as, you know, as personal as they do in New Hampshire and Iowa. New Hampshire and Iowa are not very populated states. And since they're first, there is a ground game set up there that goes on for a long time. They can't buy a bunch of ads and, you know, run a bunch of statewide ads and just try to get, you know, into the cities and things. They have to go out and meet people. They have to go do old-fashioned campaigning and talk to people, and people can get a sense of them as a human being, and it's much more personal. And so that I know all to be true. And so that's why it's important that these two states who are, Iowa's a Republican state. New Hampshire's more of a Democratic state, but it has all these independents, right? And independent voters are the ones that decide the election. And even though the New Hampshire goes blue pretty much every time, it is, a more open state. And South Carolina is always a red state. I don't remember any time that South Carolina in my lifetime voted for a Democrat. They didn't vote for Obama. They didn't vote for Clinton. They didn't vote for, any of the candidates that ran against the Republican winners. In fact, I can just search it real quick. Okay, so it's interesting. South Carolina voted for Jimmy Carter. He won by a slight margin in 1976. He got 56% of the vote. That was after Nixon. They ran the robotic and kind of dull Gerald Ford, and everyone was kind of over Nixon. And then before that, they voted for Kennedy, JFK. He got over 51%, almost 52% of the vote in South Carolina. And so South Carolina, since Jimmy Carter, has always voted for Republicans in the last, since 1976. That's so many years ago, 12 elections ago. And so South Carolina has, Joe Biden has no shot of winning South Carolina in the general election. He does have a chance and would win New Hampshire. New Hampshire almost always votes Democrat in recent years. And so, and it's a contested, at very least, it's a contested state, right? But it's a solid blue state right now. It's not considered a state that's going to vote for a Republican. And so why would he put South Carolina first? It's not a state that they can win in the general election, and New Hampshire is. So why would they piss off a state that they have, even though it's a small state with only a few electoral votes? He's bucking tradition. Well, the reason is he's going to lose. He's going to lose to Kennedy there. And so they've tried to figure a way to, this has been going on for a while, that they know that Kennedy is going to cream them in this state. And we can see it from the speech. He has connections there. They, like him. They like his style. They like his family. And he's just a better candidate. Like if he goes and meets people there, he's going to win them over. And Biden is probably going to lose to Marianne Williamson there as well. If he got 9% last time, the people there are more politically aware. They're more independent thinkers. There's a lot of truthers, a lot of rural people there. And now, he's pissed them off. And so if he got 9% before, he won't even get a vote. Who's going to vote for him over there, right? The whole thing is a mess for him. And so if he doesn't, if he forfeits the state, that looks bad. That's right off the bat. And then all of a sudden, Kennedy's a winner. Kennedy's going to do well in other states. The next thing you know, people are like, oh, he can win? Well, I'm voting for him. And that's how these things can go. That's all it takes. It takes people getting the sense that Joe Biden can lose and Kennedy can win. Biden was hidden because of COVID, and I've talked about this significantly. They couldn't roll him out as a candidate. He was challenging people to fights and push-up contests. He was losing. He was wandering around on stage. They can get him out, and he can give a speech and be somewhat lucid. But, you get older, you just can't do that. And he's going to be 80 years old. And he was too old in 2019. His brain's been deteriorating for years, and he's always been kind of an embarrassment. And so he can't go out and just campaign. Plus, he's got his so-called presidential duties, and they just want this to be a shoo-in, because an incumbent candidate usually wins the primary. They might lose in the general election, but almost always they run the primary because he's controlling the DNC. Biden controls the Democratic National Committee that elects their candidate. So he's already got an advantage. We saw what Hillary did to Bernie Sanders, but they have a real Kennedy problem and they know it, right? It's just embarrassing for them. And it's going to be embarrassing right off the bat. And so they're going to have to rig it. The fact that they're putting South Carolina first is rigging it, but they really can't do that because in New Hampshire just keep on moving the primary might be next week, like, and so, all of these things, right? The state has their legal role to vote in a primary, and if they get canceled in some way by the DNC, well, that's them admitting that they're scared of Kennedy. Why do this? Like, why do this otherwise, right? Why piss off this state if you're just going to roll through? The only reason to do this is you're scared of losing, and you're going to buck this tradition. And so the way it's framing out, once he gets through the primary, Kennedy has a lot of independent and, other support. And in these states, you can register as an independent in some of these states and vote in the primary for either party. A guy, we'll see how it goes in terms of, my ability. My wife and I have been talking about this, but we would register as Democrats and vote for Kennedy in red states because he can win all these red states because of all the support that he gets from Republicans. And even if you don't want to vote for him, if you wanted to vote for Trump, it'd still be better to run against Kennedy than Biden because you're not going to lose. You get rid of Biden and his whole cabal there, right? If that's your real goal. And so you can do that now by the red state, these states that Kennedy has no hope of winning in the general election, but can be, you can vote for anybody in the general election if you're registered Democrat or Republican, it doesn't matter. And so you can register for the primary. If enough Republicans do that, I hope there's a movement to do this, enough truthers and Republicans do this, then they can make the Democrats rig this thing out in the open. The Democrats will just rig it. They'll steal it from them. And they'll show you the elections are rigged and stolen. And, just having that is like a wonderful thing. Making the Democrats rig it against Kennedy. It's kind of getting like where I'm getting a little bit giddy about it. Like I did when Trump got elected and the Democrats were so upset and Rachel Maddow was crying. Like it's getting to be like that. Like this is getting real where a truther comes in and they take it from him. Somebody who's, truther at least adjacent, and they take it from him because they have to steal it from him because they can't let, they can't legitimize this. And just think about what that'll do to democracy and all of it. It'll wreck the Democratic Party. And this, he might run as a third party candidate. This could, there's so many great things that could happen here. And he just has to win a couple of states in the beginning and get some momentum. And, it's right there. It's right there where the humiliation of Joe Biden and the Democratic Party.
For another reason, and I believe that the motto of the granted state, live free and die, is not just a motto. The many people in New Hampshire take that personally. They have a fierce pride and liberty. Over 500 New Hampshire men died in the American Revolution to give us our freedoms, to give us our rights, along with 25,000 elsewhere in our country. And today, those rights are under attack like never before in our history. In the last 3 years, there's been an all-out assault on the Bill of Rights. We now have, for the first time, the government participating in censorship of political dissent, of people who are criticizing federal policies. We saw churches closed. We saw freedom of worship threatened. Every church in this country was closed for a year without any scientific citation, without any democratic process.
This is an important point. I don't want to talk very briefly here. But I said this, when they closed the churches because of COVID, again, I'm not a Christian. I do my meditative practice, but I am, aware of the idea of people who believe in God versus the people who don't. And my whole life in America, the Christian tradition, the Christian church and the Christians were the biggest power demographic in this country. The idea of closing churches never would have happened. And when that happened, you guys who were here know what I said. I said, now we live in a world where the science of religion dominates, where the science of religion can say, okay, you guys can't go to church because your thing is a joke. you guys can stay at home and pray if you want. But they were even slamming people. Like there was one of those girls, a Republican girl on The View, whatever her name, I don't care what it is. Don't tell me, don't care, don't need to know, was talking about healing through prayer, and she got slammed across the liberal media for saying that prayer could heal, and you need the wonderful medicines from the pharmaceutical companies and the everything else, and prayer can't do it. And so we saw a switch was thrown, right? And listen to what he says about this, because it's very significant.
There's no notice and comment, public hearings, all of that was just abolished. And bureaucrats just decided to close all the churches. And they went after freedom of assembly. They shut down. They said, we have to social distance. We have to lock ourselves in our house. They went after the Fifth Amendment rights to property rights. They closed down 3.3 million businesses in this country with no due process, no just compensation. They went after the Fourth Amendment guarantees against warrantless searches and seizures with all this intrusive government track and trace surveillance, and Americans had to show their medical records before leaving their homes or entering a public building. And they abolished jury trials for whole classes of defendants. So for the people in the pharmaceutical industry or the medical cartel, no matter how grievous your injury, no matter how negligent their conduct or reckless, Americans could not sue them for the redress. The Seventh Amendment is very simple. It says, no American shall be deprived of the right of a jury before a trial of their peers in cases or controversies exceeding $25. There is no pandemic exception. And the framers knew all about pandemics and epidemics. There was an epidemic, two epidemics during the Revolutionary War, a malaria epidemic that decimated the armies of Virginia, a smallpox epidemic that affected New Hampshire at the very time when Benedict Arnold's armies conquered Montreal, and they had to withdraw from Montreal because their troop strength was so low because of smallpox. Otherwise, today, Canada would be part of the United States.
That's very interesting. Like, he knows history, right? Like, I didn't know that. Benedict Arnold is the famous traitor. So here it is, right? Smallpox struck the Northern Army at Quebec, where many officers and men were secretly inoculating themselves, thus intensifying the epidemic. Some 1,200 of the approximately 3,200 Continentals in Montreal area were unfit for duty, most of them sick with smallpox. So they would have occupied Montreal and taken over this, big city in Canada. And, I've been to Montreal. You just drive straight up from New Hampshire, right? So it has a connection there, Maine and these states. So this is a historical event we don't know about. And quite interesting, right? That he would say that, because, Canada would have been part of America. It would be a completely different, this smallpox affected the outcome of whatever was going on there. But then listen to what he says next here.
The framers knew that. They also, between the end of the Revolution and the ratification of the Bill of Rights, there were epidemics in every city in this country, smallpox epidemics, cholera epidemics, yellow fever epidemics that killed tens of thousands of people, including many of the family members of the framers. And yet they did not put an epidemic exception in the United States Constitution. They wrote that document for hard times, not for easy times.
So think about that, because they suspended all these rights, which we know about, for this pandemic. And, these things were going on, why they wrote these rights. And so the fear-based fear-mongering and the pharmaceutical shills and all the ways that they worked this, and it hid Joe Biden away as a candidate, remember? Like, he couldn't go out and campaign because he was having these rallies where people are sitting in their cars, and he'd be out there giving a speech with a mask on. It was like the middle of the winter, and there's, whatever it was. People were in their cars, and he was, they were beeping and stuff when they liked something he said. There was about 40 cars there, and Joe Bagoo. I mean, think about all this stuff and the significance here. But here is the key point.
During the Civil War, when the Confederate government was sending agents provocateur to every American city, northern city, to drum up draft riots, Abraham Lincoln tried to arrest the Confederates when they came in. They knew who they were. And he suspended habeas corpus. And the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Roger Taney, said you can't do it. Even if the life of the nation is at stake, you cannot do it. In the Civil War, there were 659,000 people who died. It's the equivalent of 7,200,000 today, much worse than the pandemic. And yet the Supreme Court said you cannot suspend the Constitution no matter what.
So think about what he's saying here. Like, this is why he's a good candidate. And against something that we all agree was BS. And he can litigate and argue this in a debate in other places, right? And in a story form. So, I mean, I think you guys understand this way, saying that there was Confederate soldiers coming to the North, and they were provoking, putting out whatever disinformation or propaganda to get draft riots started so people would riot against being drafted to fight in the Civil War. And that Lincoln and his people knew who they were. And they arrested him, which is against the Constitution. They arrested them for, you have a right to, to display to protest. And, you have these, it's freedom of speech, and it's, multiple rights here are being violated by Lincoln. And the Supreme Court justice said, even if it means the collapse of our country, if the democracy collapses here, you can't do this. Even, when there's pandemics going on and there are more deaths in the Civil War than, he's saying, many more deaths in the Civil War than there were in terms of the pandemic, right? And the population numbers, their percentage of population. And so this is, this is a way to evaluate Kennedy as a candidate, because he can talk about these things in a way that, destroys any of these arguments, right? This is why they don't want to go up against him, because he has a historical perspective and a legal perspective, and he knows that the rights, the constitutional rights were suspended, and your ability for, your religious expression was suspended. You get a right to go to your church. It doesn't matter if everyone's dying. Like, that's your choice. You want to go there, you want to get sick, you want to, you believe in God, faith healing, whatever it is, that's your right. They can't close churches down. Right to assemble, all these things. They can't do it. And that's what the people who founded the country, and, as corrupt and Freemasonic as the founders were, I'm not a patriot, I'm not into any of this stuff, but they violated the crap out of this during the pandemic. And it was the religion of science and pseudoscience that came in, where they said, we get to tell you what, how to live and suspend all your constitutional rights.
It's more important than anything. And today, now, we have all these new surveillance technologies. We have digital currencies, AI technology, which is frightening, GPS technologies, 400,000 low-level satellites that are going to look at every square inch of the Earth every day. It has been the ambition of every totalitarian regime in history to control every aspect of human behavior. They've never been able to do it, but they can do it now. And it's so important that we counter that threat by strengthening and fortifying our democratic institutions, not weakening them. And that begins with the Bill of Rights, and it includes the New Hampshire primary. And I want to tell you, I'm going to be in this state fighting to win every vote I can in New Hampshire, Republican, Democratic, and Independent. And when I'm elected president and I'm head of the Democratic Party, I'm going to pour concrete on the notion that New Hampshire is first in the nation. Thank you very much.
So that was an epic speech. I've heard it twice now. And again, he just makes sense. Okay, so this is the Medi Deep Dive, JFK anti-boopers and a measles outbreak, Medi's deep dive. Now, deep dive is something that has been talked about in the truth community for a very long time. Diving deep into the truth. And these guys, these mainstream media, uncreative and unlikable and unwatchable and uninteresting personalities who aren't journalists, who are shills, they keep on stealing our stuff because they can't come up with their own bits and their own perspective. And the worst ones are the ones who talk about the truth community, the so-called conspiracy theorists. There was a guy who was a local news reporter for some local news station, Ben Swan, and he came up with this thing called reality check, and he was, kind of a truther. And then CNN stole that, and the reality check was all about conspiracy theorists, right? Because they're losing to the internet, and they're losing to truthers who are much more compelling. So they have to steal our bits. And this is him stealing our bits here.
What do you know about the independent state of Samoa, formerly known as Western Samoa?
I don't know a lot about it. What can you tell us about it, Medi?
6,000 miles from the mainland U.S., and it's long been a center of Polynesian culture in the South Pacific, as well as an ancestral homeland to The Rock, whose mother hails from that island nation.
No way. The Rock is from Samoa?
In late 2019, though, the country was in a public health crisis, not from a new threat like COVID, but from a very old killer of kids that had once been nearly eradicated, measles.
So this is a killer of kids, right? This is about a killer of kids, and somehow RFK Jr. and anti-boopers are killers of kids.
This is the biggest increase in deaths we've seen since records began. The figure of 32 dead is up from 25 only yesterday.
These hospitals aren't designed to deal with this, and I think the minute you're getting hospitals running at 200% and 300% capacity, I think that speaks for itself. It's incredibly serious.
It's incredibly serious. Now, MSNBC didn't cover this in 2019, and they haven't covered it really at all for covering it on its own merits, right? They don't care about Samoa, and they don't care about kids. But he's pretending he cares because he has a way that he can try to boop all over Kennedy.
The government of Samoa declared a measles epidemic in October of 2019. Most of the victims were children.
There was children were victims. I care so much about children. The children, like Michael Jackson cared about children.
In one family, 2 sisters and a brother were killed by the disease. The oldest was just 3.
Just 3 years old. It's just tragedy. We didn't cover it in 2019 when it happened, but now I care about it. I didn't care about then, neither did my network, but now I care so much.
In another family, 2 sisters-in-law both lost sons, aged 14 months and 6 months, who died just 2 days apart. The mother of the oldest told the UK's Telegraph newspaper, "I saw him every day on the life support machine and I saw him deteriorating. It's very hard to accept and to see my child suffer like that." By December, almost 4,000 cases had been reported in a country of 200,000.
So 4,000 cases.
Roughly the same population as Des Moines, Iowa.
He cares about Des Moines now, too. He's just such a caring person.
And 55 people, mostly children under the age of 4, had died. The tiny nation imposed a...
Wait, how many people?
Age of 4 had 100,000. Roughly the same population as Des Moines, Iowa. And 55 people, mostly children under the age of 4, had died.
They died. 55 of them. 55 of them. Joe Biden, this is a disease, right? Joe Biden murdered 8 children in Afghanistan. When you remember this, he made up some bogus thing. The withdrawal of Afghanistan was going poorly. They were getting hammered for these illegal wars. 1 million dead in Iraq, a failure there. Military-industrial complex wars on these, fake terrorism stuff that was going on. The BS behind the no weapons of mass destruction. Bush wars that Obama continued through his whole presidency. And even Trump continued the Afghanistan war, even so he said he was going to get out of there. And so Biden finally withdrew, which is a good thing for Biden. But, he voted for these wars. He endorsed them, and he was a part of them. It was failed policy. and he was getting hammered. And it was a disaster. Logistically, we were leaving behind billions of dollars of equipment, and the failure was on him, right? The failure is always going to be on the guy who, surrenders. I mean, that's what's happened. We lost that war in Afghanistan. The Taliban were emboldened. And so they made up this thing called ISIS-K, which we haven't heard about since. It was, a big thing that time. And Biden said we were going to transfer our way of doing battle from mobilizing, billions of dollars of troops and putting American troops' lives at risk and going to a drone war. So they started to drone people who were so-called ISIS-K. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, ISIS-K attacked, even though America was leaving and the Taliban were taking over. But the Taliban were against ISIS-K too, so it was going to be their problem. But ISIS-K attacked miraculously. ISIS was long an American CIA asset. And so, they attacked, and Biden started droning people, civilians in Afghanistan, and they struck a car that was filled with, whatever it was. There's multiple people in the car and people around the vehicle, and they killed a whole family of people. It ended up being like 12 or 14 people. 8 of them were kids. And Biden killed them, murdered them, right? This was a murder. And this guy in the MSNBC and CNN didn't say anything about it. No outrage. And it was embarrassing. All of a sudden, he's upset about 55 kids dying in Samoa. Because of why? Well, it says it here. Because of misinformation fueled the 2019 Samoa measles epidemic, which they didn't care about. Didn't say anything about. But now, okay, so I should mention this. My wife reminded me of this. I saw this headline today. And then she told me about RFK's tweet. Last year, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki called the use of cluster bombs a war crime. Now President Biden plans to send them to the Ukraine to stop the ceaseless escalation. It's time for peace. Stop the ceaseless escalation. It's time for peace. Kennedy 24. U.S. plans to send controversial cluster munitions to the Ukraine, reports say. This is from the BBC. Cluster munitions are banned by more than 100 countries, are a class of weapon that contain multiple explosives, bomblets called submunitions. And so one of the problems is that they don't always go off, but they'll blow up later when kids are playing on them or something like this. I mean, it's the same old stuff. I talked about depleted uranium before. And so here's this ass clown out there talking about Kennedy being a murderer as Joe Biden continues this bogus war, right? Completely sham of a war. And he's doing things that'll kill kids. And I mean, the thing about economic sanctions, I have that quote from Madeleine Albright that she said that when they created economic sanctions against Iraq, years and years ago under Clinton, 500,000 children died. Because when you give economic sanctions like they're doing in Russia, it filters down and kids starve. And so the economic sanctions they put against Russia is killing Russian kids and all these things that they're doing. And it was unnecessary. Like, it could have been avoided. I've talked about this before. And this ass clown, Mehdi, whatever his name is, Hassan, right, is out there saying, hey, I kind of care about kids in Samoa as long as somehow I can disparage RFK Jr.
The tiny nation imposed a 2-day national lockdown. Citizens were stuck in their homes to stop the spread. Government volunteers fanned out to help families in need. Anyone in distress was instructed to fly a red banner from their house. The banners were everywhere.
They were everywhere. And we didn't do anything.
As some overseas charities began shipping children's coffins. Children's coffins.
No way. It's so sad. He cares so much about kids.
Over to Samoa to cover for a local shortage. An international health effort was underway. The Samoan government even asked the U.S. CDC for help.
Oh, they really weren't. They really were desperate. Okay, so this goes on for a long time here. He gives you the statistics, right? That the boop rate was 92% in 2013. 2017 was this. 2018 it was that.
Oh, was suddenly on a par with some of the poorest countries in Africa. What happened to send the rate so low in 2018 specifically? Well, a growing anti-vaccine movement found a story to rally around.
Okay, so they're murderers. They kill these kids.
That year, 2 infants died after getting the vaccine. They died because their nurses had made a fatal mistake in administering the shots. They mixed
Going back to this here.
effective and cheap vaccines. In fact, in 2013, 92% of infants in Samoa were receiving the measles, mumps, rubella, or MMR vaccine.
Okay, so, you can look it up, but the baby is not born with an immune system. And it really doesn't start developing fully until they're, a year old or whatever it is, right? And so they don't have an immune system to trigger. And so this is well known. I mean, they don't want to tell you this because of the schedules and things, right?
Itself was responsible for the deaths. And they got help from a US-based anti-vax group, Children's Health Defense, which took to Facebook to question the safety of the vaccines that those infants received. But again, it wasn't the vaccine. And there was no correction from that US group. In the wake of those 2 deaths...
So they say that the nurses gave them a muscle relaxant that caused the problem. But again, big pharma. But here's the kicker right here.
Well into the outbreak. The founder of Children's Health Defense, a prominent American anti-vax activist, would later tell a Samoan newspaper that he had the Prime Minister's ear on the issue and that the island nation's leader had privately shared his doubts about the safety of immunizing the public. That activist, quote unquote, had become something of a celebrity in Samoa.
Who is that activist?
He was honored as a guest of the Prime Minister. He met with local anti-vax activists. Who was this American anti-vaxxer who bragged after the epidemic about his sway with the Samoan leader? Actually, he's the reason why I'm telling you all this.
Kaboom. He doesn't care about Samoans. He just admitted. So I've just been editing this video, and when I got to this part, because I was doing these voiceovers at different times during the day, and when I got to this part, I thought I had said it a number of times, but it was a theme throughout my whole analysis of this guy. I said over and over again, he doesn't care about these Samoan kids. No one was talking about this story. It was obvious, right? And then he confirms it. He says, the only reason I told you that story, and he spent a good 5 or 6 minutes on it, was so he could crap all over Kennedy. So that shows you everything you need to know. That they're willing to get sanctimonious and talk about dead kids and use dead kids as a how bad somebody is, only for political purposes. They don't care about kids at all. They didn't care about this kids. He wouldn't be telling this story if Kennedy wasn't there. I mean, listen to this MNFer.
Vax activists. Who was this American anti-vaxxer who bragged after the epidemic about his sway with the Samoan leader? Actually, he's the reason why I'm telling you all this.
When I am the President of the United States, I am going to end the chronic disease epidemic in this country. ADD, ADHD, speech delay.
Boo! Boo, you're killing Samoan kids. Boo.
Usually tics, Tourette's syndrome, ASD, and all.
Look, Danny Bonaducci's back here.
Autism. This is crippling to the middle class in this country. And we need to figure out what it is.
Yes, that's Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's running against Joe Biden for the Democratic presidential nomination. RFK Jr., who heads the anti-vax Children's Health Defense Network, which has since been banned from Facebook and Instagram for spreading misinformation.
Facebook and Instagram. The pillars of integrity. The pillars of integrity. See, this guy just punked himself. He totally played himself. They don't want to take on Kennedy. They just don't. They've relegated to, shills like this guy who have a weekend slot and barely get any viewers. This guy isn't going to affect the outcome of the election. He isn't, no one's going to even see these things, right? And so they have to do hit pieces and attack him. But they're not doing it like Trump. Trump just gives them blue meat, right? It gives them the blue, Democratic, talking points. Trump is polarizing figure. He's an us against them guy. He says stupid things, and his, everything Trump does, they can use as fodder for their network. They can't do this with Kennedy. Kennedy is much more polished, much more well-spoken. Like, they only showed those 2 little clips, right? And those clips aren't damning. And so this guy who has an old audience of people who are, you know, I mean, it's a dying audience. And they put these things out because they, you know, they need something. But you look at CNN, MSNBC, they're afraid to take on Kennedy. Because if you start listening to him, especially independent voters, they're going to say he's just a better guy, better candidate, better, you know, he has a better presentation. And so this is what he's doing here. But he admitted he didn't care about these kids. Well, you know, when I found out I could use it to crap all over Kennedy and talk in tones of how this tragedy happened, it's his fault, right? Like, this is how low they are and how, you know, easily their thing falls apart. This is the reason I'm telling you all this. Otherwise, this would be a non-story.
RFK Jr., who in June 2019, along with his wife, actress Cheryl Hines, was a special guest of the Samoan Prime Minister at the country's Independence Day celebration. While on that trip, Kennedy also just happened to meet with one of Samoa's most prominent anti-vaxxers, and she posted a pic of them together on Instagram, along with the hashtag #InvestigateBeforeYouVaccinate. It's on that trip that Kennedy would later brag, where he spent extensive time with the Samoan leader. Quote, "The Prime Minister was a joy to be with. He spent a lot of time with us. We met many health officials." Kennedy told reporters he and the Prime Minister only talked a limited amount about vaccines and mostly discussed whether his charity, the Children's Health Defense, could help improve Samoa's health system. Weeks later, the epidemic of the unvaccinated was underway in Samoa. And
wait, the epidemic of the unpoopinated was a term that got slammed. I mean, you know, let me do that meme here. This is Joe Biden and his crew.
I'm telling you tonight that I am tired of the incessant debate me bro mantra from conspiracy nuts on social media. But you just can't, in general, debate with conspiracists and loons.
Problem is, you know, he just keeps on moving the goalposts. I mean, first it was the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine that caused autism. What's that?
Moving the goalposts is literally what conspiracy theorists do.
Problem is, you know, he just keeps on moving the goalposts. I mean, first it was the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine that caused autism. What's that?
Moving the goalposts is literally what conspiracy theorists do. News yesterday. No, not for once again spewing racial slurs or spreading anti-Semitic tropes or platforming some infamous transphobe.
It's science, and you shut up and wear your mask. It's science, and you shut up and wear your mask. It's science, and you shut up and wear your mask.
You shouldn't cut anti-vax people out of your life. They could be dead tomorrow. Spend time with them, call them, get in the will.
Screw your freedom.
The latest data that confirms that we're still in a pandemic of the unvaccinated. Continue to be among the unvaccinated, are among the unvaccinated, are unvaccinated. The unvaccinated, there are people who are dying and who will die who didn't have to. If you haven't gotten vaccinated, do it now. Do it now. It could save your life and it could save the lives of those you love. This is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. The unvaccinated overcrowd our hospitals, are overrunning emergency rooms and intensive care units, leaving no room for someone with a heart attack or pancreatitis or cancer. This is not about freedom or personal choice. It's about protecting yourself and those around you, the people you work with, the people you care about, the people you love. My job as president is to protect all Americans. My message to unvaccinated Americans is this. We've been patient, but our patience is wearing thin, and your refusal has cost all of us. As I speak to you, millions of Americans are still unvaccinated and unprotected. And because of that, their communities are at risk, their friends are at risk, the people that they care about are at risk. But if you're unvaccinated, you're not. And you're putting yourself, more importantly, maybe from your perspective, your family and your friends at risk. Ultimately, those who are not vaccinated will end up paying the price.
You are not allowed to infect anybody just because you think you've got rights
that are delusional, of course. This delusional, evil idea, you got to identify those people and bring them out into the open so you know who they are. If you're willing to walk among us unvaccinated, you are an enemy.
At this point, staying unvaccinated is like wearing a Yankees hat to a Red Sox game. You're probably going to end up in the hospital, and it's your own damn fault.
I was so worked up over the weekend about this fucking Aaron Rodgers of the NFL. I don't even know where to begin with that story. I mean, this fucking guy, I don't watch football. Sorry, I'm not a big fan. I know the guy's a real good football player. That's why they put up with his bullshit. If I ran the NFL,
he's going to be a Hall.
You came across as a national embarrassment.
He's talking to Aaron Rodgers. You came across as a national embarrassment.
There is no other way around it. It was the most embarrassing performance of Aaron Rodgers' career.
Jeopardy and possibly putting your teammates in jeopardy, to me, is selfish.
I'd give Aaron Rodgers some advice. It would have been nice if he'd have just come to the Naval Academy and learned how to be honest.
Southern California, where as of yesterday, we started giving the vaccine to kids aged 5 and up. Finally, our kids will be able to go to. Let's see.
Woo! Woo! Oh.
I'm not vaccinated.
Where are you going? I take horse pills.
Yeah, we have to wait for them to be vaccinated because they are selfishly a endangerment to other people, including staff people here. So while we're all hopeful, and I join the president in being hopeful that we can reach a place where it is safe for people to be. What is this, the honor system? The honor system as to whether somebody's been vaccinated? Do you want them breathing in your face on the strength of their honor? So let's just see. Let's just see. I mean, again, this is about science and governance. And science and governance, we have a responsibility to make sure that the House of the Representatives chamber is not a petri dish because of the selfishness of some not to be vaccinated.
Teach people common sense. You need to get she doesn't even know what else to do to get the people of her state to get smart and listen to the facts and get vaccinated so people don't die. It's like that simple. Is it not the people who choose to remain unvaccinated right now who are causing all of this?
It is selfish at this point to not get vaccinated.
If you can be vaccinated and you refuse to, that's a selfish act. You're putting other people's lives and health at risk. You should get vaccinated.
Because frankly, we know that we can't trust the unvaccinated.
Because frankly, we know that we can't trust the unvaccinated.
Because frankly, we know that we can't trust the unvaccinated.
The new cases in COVID are because of unvaccinated folks. But it's time to start blaming the unvaccinated folks, not the regular folks. It's the unvaccinated folks that are letting us down.
The people who are not getting vaccines, who are believing the lies on the internet instead of science, it's time to start shaming them. What else? Or leave them behind. Because they are keeping the majority of Americans behind.
I think I just passed a house with a Halloween yard decoration that was a bunch of skeletons burning an anti-vaxxer at the stake. I'm gonna go.
And so there it is. It says anti-vaxxer right here. Took me a while to see this. That's why I'm pointing it out. And it's got a bunch of skeletons sitting around a campfire roasting a skeleton anti-vaxxer. This is supposed to be a fire, which is pretty effed up. Like, it's really effed up, right? And what my wife pointed out was, what did these guys die from?
Not that Halloween is a contest, but they want it.
It's the platforms like Facebook.
They're killing people. I mean, look, the only pandemic we have is among the unvaccinated. And they're killing people.
More children died that November. Kennedy sent the Samoan Prime Minister a letter pressing him to investigate whether those children died not of measles, but ridiculously of exposure to the measles vaccine. Quote,
ridiculously. It's a ridiculous statement.
Children who received the live measles virus during Samoa's recent vaccination drive may have shed the virus and inadvertently infected vulnerable children. He added, it is a regrettable possibility that these children are causalities of Merck's vaccine. He probably meant...
Word of such nonsense. What, that guy's... How is he running for president? He's a murderer of children. Well, the last guy, Biden, murdered children too, so I guess it, makes sense that way.
Casualties.
But he didn't care about those guys. He only cares about these Samoan kids now, not when it happened, now that Kennedy's running for president. Now he cares about them.
Either way, he didn't know what he was talking about. Remember, Kennedy is an environmental lawyer with zero qualifications to talk about vaccines or healthcare of any kind.
Environmental lawyer? He has zero qualifications. Who has qualifications? You don't. You're just some shill, a British reporter from the Al Jazeera that has a Sunday night show on a network that nobody watches because you guys were obsessed with Trump and conspiracy theories about Trump. It's a conspiracy theory network.
Actual physicians with actual experience have been quick to debunk RFK's letter, pointing out that there's no evidence for his claim that vaccinated kids shed the measles virus.
There's no evidence. There's zero evidence out there.
And noting that even if they had, it couldn't cause an outbreak. It was just as false as those posts by RFK's nonprofit suggesting those two Samoan infants, those two children, had died from the vaccine in 2018.
It was just he's spreading false information, and it's killing kids. He's a kid killer.
Posts that were never retracted or corrected. In fact, we reached out to Kennedy's presidential campaign for comment this week on his vaccine misinformation in Samoa, and they doubled down. This is who RFK Jr. is. This is the brand he's running on.
He is. He doubled down on it.
Deny he's anti-vaccine, and then he'll tell anti-vax crowds falsely that this is how measles epidemics end.
The thing that cured it was nutrition and clean water, not the vaccine.
No, the thing that ended the epidemic was when an emergency vaccine drive got rates back above 90% in Samoa by the end of December 2019.
It's funny how that worked, right? It just worked out for a business model. That was great for Merck, right? That outbreak was great for Merck.
But what does RFK Jr. care?
Like, who wins? Who wins this thing when there's an outbreak? Well, Merck won, right?
Ignorance, misinformation, and conspiracy theories go mainstream and get monetized. This is how he gets on the Joe Rogan podcast and gets anti-vax followers to swarm reputable doctors. And yes, I could tell you about Kennedy's gaffes, like the photoshopped Russian stock image he recently tried to pass off as a campaign ad on Twitter. I could tell you.
He could tell you about all these things. He can't tell you about Hunter Biden because he's not allowed to talk about that. You can't talk about cocaine in the White House. You can't talk about any of those things. You can't talk about Jojo Magoo being senile, dementia, and being a plagiarist and a groper and a serial groper. You can't talk about those things. Again, he didn't care about this thing in 2019, but now it's important.
Tell you how even his own family, with the name that he's traded on for years, has blasted his campaign to attack the institutions committed to reducing the tragedy of preventable infectious diseases.
Even his family is out to get him. Look at this. Look at the guy shouting.
I can tell you how excited former Trump White House aide and pardoned felon Steve Bannon is about RFK's candidacy and its potential to tilt the 2024 election to Trump. But really, all you need to know about Robert F. Kennedy Jr., about his role in our public life, about his contribution to humanity,
is that he can beat Biden, and we can't let that happen.
Is encapsulated in the story of the measles epidemic that killed scores of children in Samoa in 2019.
Scores of them. 50 kids. That's what you said. He said 50 kids.
An epidemic not just of disease, but of misinformation.
Misinformation is an epidemic of misinformation.
And vaccine denial, fueled by a politically ambitious Kennedy kid with the ear of that country's leader. A politically ambitious Kennedy kid now challenging...
A Kennedy kid? He's just a Kennedy kid. That stupid Kennedy kid. How dare he?
Joe Biden for the Democratic presidential nomination. So The next.
What an absolute tool, right? This is what they got, right? This is what they're relegated to. I mean, he just admitted he didn't care about kids dying in Samoa. You admitted that, you know, you soulless MNFer. And then, you know.
Next time you see RFK Jr. described just as a vaccine skeptic or a political maverick, remember that that does not do justice to who this guy is. There are very horrible, deadly, real-world consequences to his vaccine stance. The consequences in Samoa were the needless deaths of more than 80 people, most of them kids.
80. It turned out to be 80. 80 whole people. Joe Biden droned in one day, he killed 8. Like literally killed them. Like Kennedy, you know, whatever they want to say about this, this can be debated. Joe Biden and Obama killed hundreds of drone kids. He literally droned kids, right, in these countries. This caring guy, this caring MNFer right here, he cares so much. You know, now he does. He didn't before, but now he does.
I mean, a mother having to watch her dying child suffer in pain? Does RFK Jr. give a damn? Who knows?
Well, you didn't. You said you didn't want to report this until it screwed him. Like, you admitted it. You admitted it right here. This guy is like sad sack and look at MNFer right here. He admitted it. He admitted it. You didn't care.
Who was this American anti-vaxxer who bragged after the epidemic about his sway with the Samoan leader? Actually, he's the reason why I'm telling you all this.
Remember that when he said he didn't care? This guy.
But what we do know is that he's a proven public health threat who spreads fear and lies and conspiracies.
Conspiracy theorist. This guy, I'll show you the clip of him saying this before.
So some of you watching today may want an alternative to Joe Biden in the Democratic presidential primaries, which is fine. I get it. But RFK Jr. ain't it.
He ain't it. This guy. He's using words like ain't. He uses words like ain't. He's all Americaned out now with ain't and ain't. And he cares about kids when it suits his purpose. And he's this wonderful, caring person with the heart the size of a Grinch, right? 3 sizes too small. Okay, so these videos are going way longer than I expected. I had a bunch of other stuff I was going to get to. I probably won't do any more on Kennedy. Hopefully next video. If anything, it'll be short. They can get in. I got all this stuff mounting and building up here. But anyways, 2 days there'll be a new video. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely born from the apocalypse and the ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.